Have any of you ever woken up on the wrong side of the bed and felt like you were Godzilla? Yesterday, this happened to me. When emotion takes over your rational brain, your thinking brain takes a back seat. You become your reptile brain. This is a presentation I gave on Stroke Buddies. Ralph Preston founded Stroke Buddies and built a community I feel genuinely privileged to be a part of. He created a space where stroke survivors and their families keep going, keep learning long past the point where most support ends. In this presentation, I'm teaching the EASE framework, 4 letters that give any family living with stroke or aphasia a better way to communicate at home, starting today. This is Life Beyond Aphasia. Whether you've had a stroke or not, emotion takes over and it clouds. For me, that was just a bad morning. I don't normally wake up Godzilla E. It took me some very conscious effort and strategies that I had to do to get out of that thinking. But when you've had a stroke, it's a lot harder to shift out of that emotional state and get back to your rational brain. And imagine carrying this emotion on top of neurofatigue, any kind of subtle changes in thinking, and or if you have aphasia. And that's just the whole other layer. So you are human, your brain has changed, and both things are true at the same time. Our goal of this talk today is to acknowledge the changes that have happened and give you a framework that you're going to be able to take home and use right away. So let's talk a little bit about neurofatigue. That's not the primary part of our topic today, but I think it needs to be acknowledged, and I think it needs to be acknowledged more often than it probably is. Because when you're exhausted, your brain just doesn't work the way you'd like it to. Your body doesn't work the way you like it to. Sometimes you can have a lot of neurofatigue, sometimes you can have a little. It could be happening all the time, or it could be happening once in a while. It's different for every person. So you may be aware of all of the changes in your thinking in your body, or maybe there's some subtle things that you're not perceiving. Maybe people in your life notice some things that have changed more than you might. Maybe you did things or said things in a certain way or acted in a certain way that maybe you weren't clued into until somebody said, you know, you always say blah, blah, blah. And that's before you have a stroke. So once you've had a stroke or some kind of neurologic or brain change, you may not be perceiving these things. So the other goal of this presentation is to bring out into the open, talking about how we communicate with the people that are in our house, who we interact with on a regular basis, right? So we're going to talk about communication skills rehab never taught you. This is about what your brain needs now and how we're going to talk about communication. And I'm Genevieve. I'm a speech pathologist. My business is life speech pathology as well as life beyond aphasia. I work with both individuals who have aphasia and their families in the context of their treatment, but I also work with care partners, specifically spouse care partners, helping them navigate being a caregiver and supporting you on your journey. So first, we want to talk a little more about neurofatigue. 1 in 2 individuals after a stroke have some capacity of neurofatigue. Fatigue can absolutely come and go, and sometimes there's a pattern. Why I'm making this connection is when you have that fatigue happening, your communication is going to be harder. It's going to be harder to process information, what you're hearing. It's going to be harder to pull your thoughts together, get the right words that you want to say. It's just everything's going to be more difficult. We do know that neurofatigue is real, and it's unfortunately, part of the process. So your brain, we already know your brain is working harder than it ever needed to. I think of it as a gas tank. When you wake up in the morning, hopefully you're starting with a full gas tank, but by the end of the day, you're probably feeling on empty, and certain things take that gas away faster. Stress, emotion, hard labor, emotional things that pop up, unexpected or surprising things. So a 20-minute conversation that you would have before your stroke takes far more energy and gas than it did before the stroke. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but your care partners, your friends and family may not understand about your processing speed, or that you're feeling overwhelmed. And this is part of communication, helping others understand what you are going through, not as a pity party or anything to that effect, but just this is the reality, right? This is the reality of what you're dealing with. And when they can understand that you're tired, that you need one question at a time, you need an extra pause in between questions so you can think and respond, that's legitimate. And that's why we're talking about communication. Shifting from one thing to another has a cost now. Task switching is hard. You're watching TV and then you go to answer the phone, or you hang up the phone and now the dog is barking at the door because you've got a delivery you need to get into the house. Any kind of shifting takes more time, takes more energy, and moving your attention from one thing to something new is much harder after you've had a stroke, because the part of your brain that manages that traffic took a hit, so to speak. Shifting from a TV show to a question that your loved one is hollering from the kitchen is a lot harder to process. And then we have emotion. When emotion takes over, the brain takes a step back and it goes more into survival mode. I mentioned Godzilla at the beginning, and the reason I say Godzilla is, number one, it's very visual. You can see in your head a picture of Godzilla walking between the buildings. Godzilla is your reptile brain. Your reptile brain is your survival mode. It's the part of your brain that keeps your heart beating and your blood pumping and your breathing, all of that stuff. When emotion comes in, you go down to your reptile brain, and it can be more fight or flight. You can't process the subtleties. You might react more quickly to something than if you were in your thinking brain. And none of this is your fault. This is something you would get rid of if you could, right? There would be a lot of things. If you had 5 things you can get rid of that resulted from your stroke, this might be one of them. There might be other bigger fish to fry, so to speak. But all of these things can impact how you communicate. You're watching TV, house is quiet, and your wife calls from the kitchen and asks you a question. But you're so focused on the TV, maybe you hear her voice, maybe you guess what she's asking and you just throw out an answer. My husband knows what I do for a living, and he still does it after 34 years. I can be sitting right here where I am now in my office and in the kitchen. He'll be behind the half wall making coffee and say something about, doesn't even matter. And I go, what? And after a while, I stopped even responding. So I found that I just have to be quiet, and then he will come find me because he knows where I'm sitting. I give this example as this is a relationship thing. We all have these habits that we do at home and how we communicate. And when you have aphasia or stroke or anything that has impacted your brain, it makes it all more difficult. So you're sitting there watching TV, you're right in the middle of the dialogue, right? You're processing it because it's a complex story and you're really into it. And you know that you heard her voice. You know that she said something, but when you try to think about what she said, you didn't process it, right? It's just a partial thing. So neurofatigue, or even just a stroke, it doesn't even have to be neurofatigue, means you didn't process, you didn't make that change, you didn't make that shift to go from processing what you're watching on TV to what she said. And she didn't do anything to help the situation. If he wanted to ask me a question, he should at least come to the doorway of where I'm sitting and say, "Hey, Jen," right? To get my attention first. Because you got to get someone's attention first. And if you need that, then this is something you've got to communicate to the people that are in your house or the people that you interact with. If you're out at a meal, 3 other people sitting around the table in a moderately noisy restaurant, and you're talking to someone and then somebody wants to interject or say something, you might hear them, but you can't shift your attention to them to catch what it is they're saying, or if they have a direct question. So what can you do in this moment? You could say something like, "It would be really helpful if you said my name first so that I can shift my attention to you." And I'm guessing many of you don't do this. You probably haven't advocated for yourself in such a way that says what you need from someone else to make your communication more effective. You have a few options. You could still keep that conversation going from you sitting in your chair watching TV and she's in the kitchen, and you can holler and say, "Say it again." But is that going to be as effective? Yes, your attention has shifted, but now you've got the distance of a room and you're less likely to have a successful interaction. Or you could keep sitting there and you could guess what she asked you and you could just throw out an answer. Or you could get up and go to her and say, "Can you say it again?" So what would you want your wife to know in that moment when you're watching TV and you're not understanding her question? Ease is not a magic script. There's 4 parts to it, hence the name. E, the first E stands for the environment. What's going on in the environment? TV, dog, cat, Amazon delivery. 2, the A stands for attention. Do you have attention? Are you paying attention to them? Are they paying attention to you? S stands for simplify. We don't want 3 you probably don't grasp of context before your loved one gets to the question. You would probably like them to say, "Honey, I have something to tell you and I have a question." Pause. What that does is sets you up for success, that you know what's coming and what's being expected of you. So we want to simplify. And then the second E stands for emotion. If emotion is involved and you need to have a conversation, it's worth saying time out. So let's go into these a little more detail. E is for environment. Be in the same room. If the TV's on, let's pause it, right? Most of us are watching streaming things. We can pause these days. Pause, mute, turn it off. I had a couple that I worked with, and he always described himself as having a one-track mind his whole life. He was 72 when I met him. He's like, "I have a one-track mind. I cannot shift." So he had a lot of insight. And even though he had been married for so very long to the same woman, she still always wanted to talk to him right in the middle of the dialogue. And it was a very hard habit to break, to get her to understand why he couldn't do it. Because when they would first talk about it before I got involved, and we took it from a communication perspective, she took it personally that he could not answer her question when he's watching TV. Do you see how this could be a problem? If you take anything personally, that hurts your relationship. But once she understood, his brain was just not wired that way and that she just had to make a couple of little changes, it made all the difference in how they communicated. And what they also changed, they also used to eat dinner in front of the TV, like the TV tray kind of thing. And she'd always want to talk during dinner. So what he changed, because he was the cook, is they started eating dinner at the table without the distraction of the TV so that they could talk then. And then when they moved to the TV room, her gas tank was all filled up. She'd had all the talking she needed, and now she wasn't interrupting. It was a very subtle difference, but it made all of the difference in their relationship. So the environment is the single most problematic feature in communication. And it's the easiest to fix if you think through what's happening around you. If you're the one sitting watching the TV and your wife's calling from the other room, hit pause, hit mute, turn it off, and say, honey, repeat that. She'll see what you did. She'll see you're invested, and that will make a difference. So you want to set the room before the conversation starts, especially if it's something more than, do you want more water? That's a yes, no question versus, hey, we need to talk about why the dog is sick and we need to go to the vet. That's a very different conversation. A is for attention. Attention means you are focused on one thing at a time. Or if you're doing something like cooking, that is a higher level of attention, what we call divided attention. You're actually doing a high level shifting where you're going from the rice on there to chopping something, to stirring something, to watching the rice, making sure it doesn't burn, right? You're doing rapid shifting of attention. Attention is complicated, and shifting attention, eyeballs are not always the sign that you've shifted your attention to your loved one. Again, if my husband walks in here and I'm like, whoever this is that's banging on the keyboard, right? I'm very focused on what I'm doing. And he comes in, I do my best to shift my attention to him, but it doesn't mean my brain is there yet. My eyeballs might be there, but my brain is not. And he has learned, for the most part, that he's got to pause a couple of seconds and let my brain catch up to my intention of shifting my attention. When you're in a show processing dialogue, it'd be really nice if you didn't get interrupted right at that point. But then again, we have streaming services, you can hit rewind. No prep time means a failed shift every time. If you're focused on something and your wife calls, you haven't had the opportunity to shift your attention. She's just expecting an answer like she used to get probably before your stroke. And here's what you can say. Here's one script you could use. When I'm watching TV, I can't just shift my attention to you. Would you try to come into the room, get my attention? And if it's not important, could we talk about it at dinner instead? Hard, sounds easy, hard thing to do. This is going to come across as sounding self-centered, like she has to cater to you. Yes and no. She needs to cater to you, but by you guys having this open communication and understanding what the challenges are, you can use the EASE framework and make it better. Let's go to S for simplify. Most of us think out loud. We don't lead with a question. We lead with all of the things we're thinking about and these extra details that are just not necessary. The hardest part will be to change this. Maybe lead with a question. Honey, I have a question. Your message, ask the question first. Ask your wife to ask you the question first and then fill in the details after. Because if you have that question, it's something for you to already be processing. And then when you get the details after, it helps you then give a response. Set the context before you get to the important part. You can do the same thing with your wife. Honey, I want to talk about the questions we have before we go to the doctor tomorrow. Perfect. She knows what you're talking about. Am I listening or am I helping you to problem solve? This is one of my, I don't know, I'm going to call it a parenting masterpiece. It's something I had to learn to do with my daughters because I am a problem solver. And I need to know what is expected of me. Am I just listening? Then I'll be quiet and I'm going to sit back and just let the story happen and not solve it. But if I'm in problem solving mode, I'm going to start picking up on details. I'm going to want to ask questions. I'm going to want to get clarity. So this is a skill you could do with the people that are important with you. Am I just listening to a story or are we problem solving? Changes everything. Another way to simplify, one question, wait, ask a follow-up question. Instead of, what do you want to have for dinner? And do you think we should invite George the neighbor? And would you rather have shrimp or chicken? That's a lot of information all at one time, right? Ask one question at a time and get your answer and then keep moving.
None of us multitask. The brain, when you think you're multitasking, your brain is semi-rapidly shifting between tasks. Your brain only processes one task at a time. Science, end of story.
You cannot do multiple things at one time. E is for emotion. You already know this one because we already talked about Godzilla. You don't have the big discussion when you or the person you're talking with is in an emotional state. Even if we're talking to your mom or your sister or there's some conflict, it's better to try and get distance from that. Or at least if you can't get distance and put it off, you acknowledge the emotion because that helps people not guess, helps people not misinterpret. It helps people not maybe take things less personally. Both of you deserve the better window. What does this mean with emotion, with Godzilla? When you're in Godzilla mode or your person that you're talking to is in Godzilla mode, you are not going to problem solve the way you would as if the emotion were not part of it. Say it out loud. I want to have this talk, but I need some time to cool off. Just say it. We need to come back to this later. Own the bad mood. Yesterday, if my husband had been home, he would have gotten an earful because I was in full Godzilla mode. So luckily it's just the pets and I didn't have to talk to anybody for a while. Own your bad mood, acknowledge it, and see if you can come back to the discussion at another time. Knowing all of this, every conversation's not going to go perfectly, but at least now you have a framework. You have a way you can diagnose. You can start looking at, ooh, that conversation went bad. Why? Was it the environment? Was it the attention? Did it need to be simplified? Or was emotion taking over? And did those things impact that conversation? So now you have a tool that you can use before you get into the conversation, and you can use the exact same tool to diagnose when it didn't go right. Godzilla may not announce himself. You may have this feeling and not acknowledge what's happening. What I want to encourage you to do is catch it when it happens. When you just feel like you're the pissed off cat, that's your Godzilla brain. That's that reptile brain. If you can recognize that in yourself, then you can do something about it and not let it escalate. And that's when you know it's the time to not be having the big conversations. And if you're perceiving your person that you're talking to, that they're in their Godzilla brain, that their emotions are all ramped up, you can say, I see we're both a little hot under the collar. How about we take a break and come back to this topic? That's acknowledging it and trying to put something in place to help with your communication. So here's what you can do. If you already know the answer before the conversation starts, say it. If you are running on empty, and it's getting bedtime and your wife wants to talk to you about something important, you got to say, I love you, but I can't do this now. I'm on empty. Can we table this to the morning? And then make sure you do follow up with it. Or if you're in Godzilla mode or she's in Godzilla mode, acknowledge it and say, let's come back to it. This is empowerment. This is you taking charge of your communication. And here's what changes. When you start thinking about easing into a conversation, or you use the ease framework to diagnose when it goes sideways, you can learn. You can keep practicing and your communication can get better. Your assignment, pick a letter. I highly recommend start with environment because I want you to focus on one thing. When you interact with whoever your person is, the one you interact with the most, think about the environment. If you're asking a question of your wife and she's in the kitchen and the TV, mute the TV first. It doesn't have to be her doing all of these changes. Now that you are in the know, you're more aware, try and tackle the environment. Or if you realize there's a lot of chaos going on and you go to ask a question, stop yourself, see what you can manage in the environment, and then ask the question. Just start with one of these. Environment is probably the easiest one to manage, but it's going to take some practice and it's going to take awareness. The next one I would say is attention. Make sure if you want to ask your wife a question, say, honey, and then wait. Give her a pause. Let her stop what she's doing and give you her attention. Honey, pause. I have a question. And then ask your question. Sounds easy. It's hard to do, but with practice, it can get better. And then pay attention to how you ask questions. Are you saying in a simple way, or are you really muddying it up by giving too much context? And then last, look at emotion. Try it and recognize if either of you are in Godzilla mode, that's not the time to have the big conversations. That's it. That's the ease framework. Ralph, thank you. What you've built with Stroke Buddies matters, and being invited to teach to your community is something I'm grateful for. If ease landed for you, try one thing today. Start with E, the environment. Start by changing the room first. Rehab ends. Life doesn't. Rebuild communication, rebuild connection, rebuild life. This is Life Beyond Aphasia.